Welcome to Staying Sweet, the podcast. Tune into my weekly podcast to hear me, Alice Bradley, delve deeper into building your brand and enjoying a luxury lifestyle. All while staying sweet, of course. Whether you're looking to level up in business, start something of your own, or balance a more exciting, fulfilling, and healthier lifestyle, each episode will be created especially to inspire and encourage your own success so you can really have it all. Plus, don't miss out on the Staying Sweet specials, a series of exclusive interviews and conversations with Alice Bradley's network of inspiring entrepreneurs and brand owners. Always protect your sweetness, your light is not a weakness. Don't forget, there are new episodes every Monday. For daily content, you can check out my Instagram and you can follow me at alicelucybradley. Stay sweet! Hey guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Staying Sweet, the podcast. It's lovely to have you with me today, and I really hope this podcast episode is going to be informative. It's very niche and very specific, so if it resonates with you and if it's something that you're pursuing or you're looking into doing yourself, then stick around. Basically, today is talking about how I interview and how to confidently interview someone for the purpose of a write-up or an interview that might be going on a video platform or TV show, radio show, any of the above. I really think there's lots of different skills that I've picked up along the way through interviewing, and actually it's a really important skill to have, because as we form our own personal brands and our own platforms, we do come across these situations where we're almost in an interview-like state where we're talking to people and we're actually trying to build a conversation. So today's episode is going to touch on that, and I'm really excited to dive in because I've got lots of little tips and tricks up my sleeve to share. So firstly, let's start with updates. You guys know that I love to share my updates and keep you informed with how my week's gone and what I've been getting up to. This week has been a very, I was going to say leisurely week. It's not been leisurely. It's just been a work from home admin week. And sometimes those weeks are just the best for getting yourself organized, getting yourself together. I've had a few interviews this week, hence the inspo to do a podcast specifically on interviews. But I interviewed a rising star this week for the magazine that I write for, Arcadia. I can't say too much because obviously it is all under wraps until the magazine is launched and available for you guys to purchase. But I interviewed a very exciting person, an actress / model in the industry who, has been in the industry for a long time and is just and was just such a lovely person to speak to. So I was really inspired. I was thinking this week, what could I talk about that would be beneficial to those wanting to build their personal brand or wanting to delve into the journalism field? And I feel like interviews and succeeding in getting a good interview out of someone is a really important skill to have. So we're going to touch on that today, and I really did think that, reflecting on my experience this week, I wanted to share what it is to interview and how it's such an integral part of being a journalist. I also just want to disclose that I am by no means an expert in this. I have interviewed lots of people throughout my career so far as a journalist, but I learn things every single time I interview someone, and I'm still nervous to this day to do interviews. It's not something that you'll ever be fully comfortable with because you are having to adapt and transform the way you interview someone. It's all dependent on how the person you're interviewing reciprocates energy back, or whether they are media trained. If they're really good at giving an interview, then usually it's a real breeze for the journalist, and you guys can just sort of sit back and take in the answers and just enjoy the interview. But if it's a dry, awkward interview, you are doing the most to get the most out of what they're saying. And obviously the key here is to get good informative quotes that are stuff that they've not said before, isn't just PR jargon and just PR push, and also be something that's quite interesting and insightful, because again, your article is going to be a piece that people are going to come to read, to learn more and to be entertained. So yeah, there's a lot of things you have to cover when interviewing someone confidently. So we're going to touch on that today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. So my affirmation for this week is quite a vague one, but I think it works quite well for the topic that we're talking about. I'm dedicated to my goals and I put effort into reaching my goals well. I like this because although there's a lot of pressure to be perfect, and I know we don't need to be solely perfect at all times, it's important that we show up effectively and we learn from each time we try and we show up. We're dedicated to the goals that we put in place. So if you're wanting to be a journalist one day, maybe you're studying and you're really trying to hone your skills, then this podcast is going to be a great step forward in the right direction. So yeah, first topic today really is the importance of professionalism versus personality. So what makes a good interview, how to utilize both being a professional point of power but also showcasing your personality in order to bring out their personality. I feel like there's really good examples of journalists and interviewers that have just done such a good job in bringing out a different side to the person they're interviewing. I think it's important that you have a mixture of light conversation as well as time to let the person you're interviewing do the talking. So ultimately, the interview isn't about you. Avoid chipping in or breaking their quotes up. Avoid kind of getting involved too much and giving your opinion, because when you're going through the transcription, you're just going to feel so awkward because you've just answered their own question and you've either put words in their mouth or given your own experience and not actually listened to what they've said. So make sure you really do pay attention to how you bring your personality into an interview whilst also knowing where to rein it in. So a really good example of this, someone I think who does it cleverly and it's almost her niche and her way of bringing out a new flavour and a new flair to the person that they're interviewing, is Alison Hammond. You guys probably already know her and love her. I adore her. I think she's got a really effective interview approach, and although it's very off the wall and usually very spontaneous, she manages to pull things out of people that you would not get with anybody else. And I personally don't think I'd be able to pull out of the person that she's interviewed before. So an interview that I absolutely love, and I think it's probably my favourite celebrity interview of all time, is when Alison Hammond interviewed Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford. I cannot fault this interview one bit, even though it is extremely chaotic and just all over the place. Somehow it works. It's just the most hilarious, like one-liner after one-liner. You really do see the flair of Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling. I mean, they're both charismatic actors anyway, but you just see this entirely new side of them, and I think Alison did such a good job in pulling it out of them, because ultimately when you're looking at interviewing someone, say they're doing a press day for something that they're releasing or they're in, for example, like a movie, they're going to be sitting through hundreds of interviews. If it's not on TV, it's going to be a phoner interview, or it's going to be, something that they're doing in person and they're having to sit through hours and hours and hours of the same questions. It's so important that you do bring some sort of flair to your interview. You want to be remembered. You want to be the person that pulled out that key quote from that actor or that actress. And I think that's really where Alison Hammond does so well. She really does pull something new out of everyone she speaks to. I really, really like her. I do think it's her energy that brings out this new kind of element to each actor that she speaks to, or whoever she's interviewing. I think she just does it fantastically. But one thing I do think she could do better is letting people finish. And I know that's so ironic as somebody who is really good at butting in and just getting involved in a conversation, overlapping. I do it quite a lot. I notice it on my vlogs and I notice it on, things that I've recorded with friends and things like that. I find it really awkward sometimes to listen back to interviews or conversations or even my podcast episodes, because it's so easy to overlap, and actually it shows that you're comfortable with the person and it is healthy. But when you're going into something with the purpose of getting key quotes and answers from them, you don't want to be cutting them off and you don't want to be disturbing the quote that you want to pull from the interview. So really let them finish, take a pause, allow them time to really think of a good answer. They might even be flustered themselves. I've interviewed quite a lot of up and coming people, And a lot of singers and artists and actresses that have not done much in terms of media training or haven't been really given that opportunity just yet to shine in an interview, because it's such a daunting thing. Like, I get nervous for interviews, but I'm sure the people on the other side of things get nervous. They're doing hundreds of these interviews and they're having to come up with good answers on the spot. Sometimes they do get the questions in advance, and I think that can enable them just to have a better answer. But again, sometimes you get the best answers from a really impromptu question. So it's just that real distinction, professionalism versus personality, and just striking the right balance. Ultimately, if you're doing this as a job and you're wanting to get a sustained experience with all the people you interview, you want to really master how you speak to others, and the only way you can do that is through practice. I have definitely noticed a difference over the years. It's something that I'm still learning to this day. I still get flustered, I still forget my questions and ask the same things twice, but you've just got to learn from every single experience and not be too scared about where it could go or where it could lead. Just be confident in just the belief that you are just as important to be interviewing as they are to be answering the questions. I'm going to be sharing some techniques that I use in order to get all the answers I possibly need for an interview. And depending on the brief, depending on what I have to do or how many questions I need, how long the piece is going to be, I really look at creating a story arc. This is where you are going to be the most successful with your interviewing skills and your interviewing tactics. Obviously, questions and answers come out of nowhere, and sometimes the person you're interviewing answers 3 of your questions in one hit and you're like, crap, what do? I need to move on to the next thing. Or sometimes you'll have this moment where you're listening to what they're saying and you can extract like 3 other questions from what they've just said. So allow yourself the freedom to be spontaneous. But if you're someone like me who really likes to stick to a key plan and something that's cohesive, I think create a story arc. And the only way you're going to be able to do this is through really, really researching who you're speaking to and plucking questions from the person in an orderly fashion. So maybe you're starting with their early years in their career. If there's someone up and coming, you could be talking about how they got introduced to the industry, how they've evolved, where they've come from, where they're originating from, and then you flow into the rest of the article. You won't always be able to stick to this method, and that is okay, but if you can steer the questions to flow organically one after the other, you will avoid flitting between topics and getting them to answer the same question twice, because there's nothing worse than really concentrating on you having to ask the questions and maybe making some notes, and then you ask a question that they've literally just answered and it just looks really awkward. They usually feel awkward because they're thinking, well, did you just listen to me? Did you listen to anything I just said? Because you're relying on maybe the audio transcription, or maybe you're recording it, so you're not actually fully listening to what the person has to say. And it's so incredibly hard sometimes to balance everything. And I think it is dependent on whether you are talking to someone on Zoom over interview, or whether you're on a phone interview, or whether you're face-to-face, and actually recording, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. Like actually sitting there and looking interested, but also thinking, okay, what's my next question? There's so much to learn, and I definitely am not an expert in this, but I definitely have noticed from my experience that just having a natural flow of questions prepared will ease the interviewee so much more. It will enable them to elaborate on topics, and it will just make them feel like, okay, I know where this interview is going. And I feel like that leads to stronger answers because they're going to be more relaxed in your presence. I also want you guys to take into consideration that it is going to be really helpful when you go to write up your piece or put together your video interview. It will be a stronger experience if it's cohesive, if it flows, if it's a story to tell. And the only way you're going to know how to do that is to do your research. Do not have questions in there that make no sense or are totally irrelevant to the point of the interview. Avoid, where you can, mentioning things that are completely out of date, because it will just show that you've read an article from 4 years ago and you've actually not caught up on what they're doing now, and that is where you're going to get yourself into hot water. I always say as well, and this is one of the earliest skills and tips that I learned from my very first course in journalism, and this was actually pre-uni. I actually did a short course for fashion journalism at UAL when I was, I believe, 15 or 16 years old. It was a paid course. Again, if they still offer those, I will link those in the show notes, because I actually did find that course incredibly beneficial to getting my head in the game for what uni was going to be like. But in this course, we learned straight away that you never ever ask your tough questions first. You never ask the awkward question about the affair or the dating history or the controversy. You always save those questions till last, because if you start with that, the person you're interviewing or their publicist or PR that is representing them could turn around and go, no, we're not doing this. I'm not having you interview this person. That's it. That's the interview over and done with. And you have nothing. You walk away from the interview with absolutely nothing to use and utilize in your article. So be so incredibly careful with the questions that you ask. It's really awkward. It's going to make them feel uncomfortable if you literally look like you're completely uneducated and you've not researched this person well enough to speak to them for 20 minutes. So do your research. Make sure that you really analyze your questions. If you can, get someone higher up in your publication to have a look over the questions just to make sure everything's okay. And if you can't do that, if you're given sort of free rein and it really is your head on the chopping block, then just make sure that you have checked every single question over and just made sure that everything is correct. Like, even if it's just little bits of information, facts maybe about the movie that they're in, release dates, that type of thing. Just looking like you've done your research and having things to talk about with the person you're interviewing is going to make all the difference. So yeah, I'm going to give an example of my first ever video interview, which I did back in 2017. So I was very lucky to be able to interview Martin Gore from Depeche Mode back in 2017. Now, this interview, I learned so much from this whole entire experience because it was so unexpected. It was incredibly spontaneous. I essentially won a competition to be part of their fan takeover. It was 365 days of fan takeovers, and basically each fan was able to post a photo and talk about why they were a fan of the band. And what happened was Sony Records found out that I was studying to be a journalist at the time, because I popped it in my application and I just said I want to be a journalist one day, and I'm freelance writing. I do a little bit of writing here and there. I'd only been working and doing freelance for Arcadia for about 3 or 4 months, so I was very hot off the press and just totally in the deep end here. I'd never done this before. I'd barely interviewed anyone. I'd only really done reviews, and yeah, it was a really surreal experience. But Sony Records contacted me the day before, so yeah, they gave me about less than 24 hours to accept their offer to go and interview Martin Gore on his press day. So they were staying in a hotel, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember the name of the hotel that they were in, but the whole entire band was split off and were given a group of journalists to talk to. For some reason, they said, look, we want to work with you, and we know you're a journalist, we know you're studying to be a journalist. Would you like this experience? It's a once in a lifetime, and we will record it and we will post on behalf of Sony Records onto the Facebook page and onto YouTube, and you will be the interviewer talking to Martin about Depeche Mode and about the band. So I was given a very short brief, and the brief was to post on the Facebook and ask fans for questions. Now, this was really a crazy experience, because not only was I showing my face on this platform with over 7 million followers, I had to ask the fans for questions. And you know what it's like in these types of situations. You get trolled, you get comments saying, how is she old enough to know who Depeche Mode are? How is she able to interview them? Blah, blah, blah. But I put out a post saying, look, I'm going to be taking your questions. I didn't have access to the questions until about an hour, not even an hour before the interview. I was given a small selection of questions, I think about 20 questions in the end, and I was given about half an hour, and I sat at the bar in the hotel with my father. So my father was and it still is, a really big fan of Depeche Mode, so I was able to bring him along with me. So not only did I have the pressure of having to do this interview and going, right, okay, I'm going to have to be on TV or in front of cameras, I'm going to be speaking in front of this whole team of people, and Martin, my dad's also going to be there because I really want him to be in this experience, and he's a huge fan and has been a huge fan of Depeche Mode since he was a kid or a teen growing up. And there's me in a room, and there's me trying to work out what questions to ask in the right order. And because they were given to me in such a almost haphazard way, I sort of freaked myself out and I really was not prepared. I think if I was going into it now, I would know how to quickly write those questions out in a cohesive story arc, so it would have been a much more comfortable interview. But let's just say it was completely overwhelming. It was the most incredible experience. I firstly want to say it was the most incredible experience, and I learnt so much, and I'm so grateful to Sony Records for giving me the opportunity. But oh my god, was the interview a shambles. Like, I think if I watched the interview back now, I'd probably be able to determine how to do things better, but I can't even bring myself to do that. I literally get so cringed out by the thought of it. And the interview is available to watch on YouTube and obviously on the Facebook page for Depeche Mode. So I'm going to do the embarrassing thing, and I'm going to find the video because somebody reposted it, I believe, on YouTube. So I will get the link to it and I will link it below, because I want you guys to use it as a what not to do. There's obviously things that I might have done well, but I honestly think I was just so scared of being in a room with all these incredible people that I was just so awkward, and it was really, really surreal. And I was using fan questions, so none of the questions really were cohesive. It was my first video interview, and let's just say when that video was uploaded, I had a lot of great feedback, don't get me wrong, but I just honed in on all the negativity, and I was just absolutely torn apart by fans and, real diehard fans of this band, people that had been huge fans for like 30 years, gone to all their tours. And then there was 20-year-old Alice, interviewing somebody who I shouldn't really know of because, it's not my era of music. So it was really uncomfortable in that regard. I felt like there was a lot of pressure for it to be perfect. I really wish, and I hope one day to be able to interview them again and interview the band actually collectively. Hopefully one day I can say that I can do that. And who knows, if anyone is listening to this that has any connection to Depeche Mode, I would love to re-interview them and do it properly again, just because I was in such a fluster. And yeah, I just cringe every time I think about it. Like, I'm literally cringing right now. So yeah, it's not always going to be perfect. You're going to learn from every interview you do. You might say something that you think, oh God, why did I just say that? Why did I ask that question? You're not going to know until you learn on the spot. And I think it links back quite nicely to my, quote of the week, my affirmation of the week, that you need to put effort into reaching your goals. And in order to do things well, you have to just try and you have to show up for yourself. So show up, try not to be too hard on yourself. If it does go wrong, most of the time it hasn't gone wrong. And when you re-listen to the audio clip or the recording to transcribe, you go, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Because in our heads, when something feels awkward and cringy, we tend to overwork it and make it feel like it's a lot more horrendous than it actually is. So yeah, I learned a lot from that interview experience, and I just really want to share that insight with you because been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So I want to leave you guys with some tips that I hope will help you in your interviewing process and just get you feeling a little bit more prepared. So the first one is to research properly. Make sure you don't just get yourself half-assed info that will lead you to embarrassing yourself. Do the research. If it's an interview that really does take time, if you're creating something that is detailed, a really detailed specific piece, please just research as many different avenues as possible, things they do in their spare time, who they're hanging out with, read up on these people, like do it properly, look at their social media, maybe follow them on Instagram for as long as you possibly can, have a little look and just see if they're sharing anything insightful, in the last few days or weeks prior to your interview. This will also give you a more natural rapport, and you guys will be able to use these little bits of info for small talk. So say for instance they were on a shoot yesterday and you're interviewing them today, you could ask them about the shoot and you could say, oh, I really like this piece that you shared, blah blah blah. It just sounds like you are invested and you are interested in them. I think the next thing that is super important for those of you who are wanting to interview professionally and just show up in the most professional manner, please, whatever you do, back up your recordings and store them safely. Even if you interviewed someone a year ago, keep it. You never know what could happen or where you would need to prove that you have audio recording or footage or whatever, because sometimes things go wrong or people don't like the way that the interview has been, reported, and that can lead to a lot of questions as to how you've transcribed the interview, whether you asked the right questions, etc. If you just have that recording, it just protects you a lot more. It's your evidence at the end of the day. So worst case, audio evidence, so you can protect yourself against a lawsuit or in a lawsuit. But ultimately, I think just having yourself prepared is going to be the best course of action for a confident interview. Take it as it comes, enjoy the answers that you get, and try not to stress too much if you didn't get all your questions answered, because sometimes those questions just weren't meant to fit into the interview and it's all you can really do at the end of the day. But that is it for today's episode. I feel like I could really talk more about this topic, but I really just wanted to give you guys an insight and a few tips and tricks I've picked up along the way. I really hope it's going to be beneficial, and if you guys are interested in interviewing or becoming a journalist, you guys can always drop me a message on Instagram or drop me an email and let me know what you want to know more about, and I will be more than happy to share any information I can. Of course, I will pop lots of info in the show notes and a breakdown really of my top tips, and then you guys can make sure you utilize those to the best of your ability. But yeah, thank you so much guys for tuning in. As always, please do let me know if there are any topics you'd like me to cover in an upcoming podcast, and you guys know you can do that by reaching out over on Instagram through DMs, or you guys can drop me an email, same as just general questions. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to Staying Sweet, the podcast. If you enjoyed listening, please do leave a review, and I will catch you next week for a new episode. Stay sweet.